Koleinu Hashem Tzavoi Shemai Kol Yisrael
Koleinu Hashem Tzavoi Shemai Kol Yisrael
Baruch Atah Hashem Kol Yisrael
Baruch Atah Hashem Kol Yisrael.
Koleinu Hashem Tzavoi Shemai Kol Yisrael Kol Yisrael Atah Hashem Kol Yisrael Baruch Atah Hashem Kol Yisrael.
How arts transmitted to you throughout the generations, and also how you decided to document Jewish events, Jewish life from England and from other places, from other countries.
I think, first of all, let me take the first question is about my family history. I was just born into the art world. My father was a fashion designer. My mother was an antique dealer. My grandfather was a sculptor. I had two aunts were painters. It was born and bred into us that the visual language was very, very important. So whatever you did in a visual context was important. How you dressed, how you laid a table, how you decorated a cake. That language was vital. I remember as a young child, I used to design my own dolls' clothes and play with them and play with rags and create. Creating was constantly in my environment. It's just something I was born with. It was in my family, and it was just something that was just so natural. And I always knew by the age of 9 that I wanted to be a professional artist. But my mother said, you don't earn a living, and you've got to, if you want to be an artist, you've got to link it up with having a teaching degree. Now there were various things that you asked me about history that became very interesting. Obviously, one's social experience. So I lived in an area that wasn't very Jewish, but was very important that we had Friday night and we went to the synagogue. Now, the synagogue became a very important nucleus in our community because though people traveled in, it was a time when people met Jewish people, because normally I didn't enter my school. I had to make an effort to go to social groups. So the synagogue became a very important part of my life. And also I began to be aware of characterization within a community. So though you think of a community being one type, in fact, it's got loads of different, it's like a village. So my mother was very active in the synagogue, but I used to sit with her very quietly and watch this drama through. And that, what with the art and seeing that drama and knowing my identity, knowing who I was important. So I feel in life that you don't have boundaries. But within Judaism, you do. Even if you don't keep them, you know there's boundaries there. So you know where there's Shabbat's the end of the week. You know that the festivals are in certain seasons. You know, Friday is the end of the week, and I always used to share it with my family. We didn't entertain much, but it was my family time. So it became having a structure that came through, obviously, from my grandparents, but then my parents. So being Jewish seemed to be important to me. It gave color to my life. The other thing is, you asked me about how did I mix history with art. I think being a natural artist, being forced to be a teacher, and I actually didn't teach art. I was a trained art teacher. I taught all subjects. So I had children that couldn't read and write, and children from poor backgrounds. My role was to give them confidence and give them basic skills to get through life. And I was very dedicated teacher, and I loved it. But the training of being a teacher means that you see things in a broader context. So I was in a difficult primary school. I was dealing with social workers. I was dealing with the police. I was often dealing with medical help out. I was dealing with parents from all sorts of walks of life that I would never normally have met. So I often went to parents' homes. We often made functions for parents so they would be happy to come into the school, so they could relate to me if there was any problems. So this broadening awareness of community, and then my own Jewish identity became entwined. And also the fact of the discipline. So as an artist, most people find that me quite different, is because I had to be disciplined in a class. I had to have my lessons prepared. I had to structure my day, and I still do that. So that sort of discipline and looking at who I was and the community made me question, how does community build up? How does identity build up? What are the influences on that? Where is it leading us? That led me to this sort of where I am now. I did have issues in my early years, which changed. I was at a public school, which is a paying private school, in my first year up to 11, and was very, very unhappy, really unhappy. I was a fish out of water. I didn't belong. People didn't understand me. They didn't think like I did. It was a very rigid school. And I went into myself. So I became even more creative. So I created my dolls, had different characters. They were my friends. And my artwork developed as being part of my friendship. And that never left me, this characterization of figures and me giving identity to the figures. And then I changed schools to 11 to another school. And then in the middle of my exam studies, you do GCSEs, and it's a 2-year course. So the first term, my GCSE course, the school sold out. It's a private school. It sold its promises. And we had to change schools. And no one would take me because I was right in the middle of a GCSE course. There was no opening. And by law, you have to go to school. So I ended up at a local comprehensive with my cleaner's daughter. And my family were quite horrified by this. But in fact, it was the best move I ever had. So I was thrown into a wider community, understanding personalities within a community, and actually being friends, being part of the group. And I really, they embraced me. So 2 other friends went. One left after a term, one left after a year. I stayed on to do my A-levels and went to university after that. But I loved all the different characters and the different people and being involved in the school. And that hasn't left me. That need to, even now I work as an artist, so I have my own studio and that. I now work in Brixton, which is south of the river. I was working in East London. I enjoy characterization. I enjoy people, and I'm interested what makes personalities develop. And a lot of it is your experiences and your history. Your experiences come from your history, from your identity, from your memories and your structure. So it's the psychology, the social psychology I'm really interested, what was embedded to me very early. Most of the time, it depends. Obviously, you can't take photographs in a service, even in a non-orthodox place. People will be embarrassed by that. So I would go to a service and I would observe the atmosphere and the relationship of the people and how they're sitting, and that would be my interest. And then I would revisit it, even if it was empty, and then implant that memory of the atmosphere into the structure. So first of all, it's get the atmosphere and how that synagogue talking to you, and perhaps I talk to some of the people, and then putting that into a structure. Also, a synagogue. My early years was just on the synagogues. Well, my early work was on London Life actually, and then I evolved into the synagogues. The synagogue themselves tell you something about how Jewish people see themselves. Where is it placed? Is it hidden? So in early history, a lot of synagogues are hidden. And even today, some synagogues are very bland outside. Other synagogues are very much of a statement piece. We've arrived, we're here, you're not going to push us aside. So there's two psychologies going on. One, we want to be discreet and personal and enclosed. The other one is we are who we are and we're going to be out there and we don't care who notices us. There's also the influence of wealth. When you look into a synagogue, how much money is being put into it. So only the stained glass windows, but what people have donated. And these little hints of the architectural detail also interested me because it's about a statement about ourselves. And then, of course, I revolved into thinking about outside the synagogue, besides the inside of the synagogue, how we have private space and public space. And it's evolved wider and wider. So obviously I've concentrated a lot on Britain. And then I did my Romanian roots. I'm now going back to doing quite a lot on British work, and also I've done things on feminism where women cannot reveal their identity, that they're not allowed to express themselves. So it's about identity and how we see ourselves and how we feel we fit in and how we belong. In the work I've done on Europe, on the Holocaust theme, I tried, if possible, to give it an optimistic move, because I don't think you can go down the area of blame. We're now dealing with 3 generations on. But I want people to remember Jews in a good light. We weren't bad people. We were people that gave to society, and we still give to society. And I wanted to show some of the visual stories and painting are more detailed in the sense that I go into the industries and the contribution. But in the Holocaust theme, I wanted to show that even when things have gone, destroyed, have been ruined, whether it's through bomb damage or whether it's through dwindling communities because they're no longer there, because the dwindling damage that's been done from the Holocaust, I wanted people to realize that life amongst the debris, the rubbish, can regrow into a new spirit, and that Jews move on. So though in that space, which once was a holy space, and then was demolished or destroyed or deteriorated, out of that grew a new spiritual growth. So that has also been a very, very popular series. I've done it in Europe now, and I've done it in the Middle East and North Africa on the Sephardim, about regrowth and how we take our culture from our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and twin it with modernity. So that defines who we are. The work I'm doing at the moment, besides the feminist work, is 2 areas of work that I'm tackling at the moment. So one is I've gone back to my British roots, and I'm doing something in York, which is on the Clifford Tower, where there was a medieval massacre at that time in 1100. And every year it's remembered as a commemoration of interfaith, that this should never happen again. And I'm looking at it, but it has happened again, and it's still happening, and it's happening all over the world. So what have we actually learned from our history? So this for me, is a subject that's just got to be told. And now, it's now the story has to be told. So I've gone up to York. I've started my research. I've been to the Tower. I've looked at the medieval archives. I've done work in other medieval periods in Britain. So I'd know what they had to wear certain uniform, like pointed hats. So I'd know what a Jewish people looked like. I'd know what the other people would look like, the community generally, the folks would look like. So I could build up a picture what it was like to be a Jew at that time. So when I do my history, I try to put myself into that place. What was it like to be at that time in that history? And trying to get people to relate the pressures that a minority group felt and then compare it to what we are now. So in this one on Clifford Tower, I'm meeting the rabbi in 10 days' time. I've got the Board of Deputies interested in this project. I want to try and put it onto an interfaith piece. So that's one project that I'm doing at the moment. And then there's another project. So I'm doing something which is quite different, which is slightly deviating, but it's subtle. It's subtle. So I'm going back to the East End of London, where a lot of Jews came in, and I've been working there again. And I'm doing a history which is cultural change rather than religious change. Now, I've done this because I'm finding society's become quite woke. And the moment you show them there's a church, or there's a mosque, or there's even a synagogue, it's like they blanket. They're not looking, they blanket. I want to wedge people's perception. As an artist, my role is to open people's perception. And what I've done in this composition, which is completely new and a new technique, and I'll come back to the technique in a minute, which is very, very different. I've gone into cultural change. So I've looked at the dot workers and then the Jews coming into Petticoat Lane, and then now the Bangladeshis are there now, and now the very wealthy part of the community. So you get a revolving change of the community, but not necessarily religious change. So you see the changes in perhaps their occupation, or the way they dress, or the way the history has dictated to them. And how I presented this is I've taken my canvas, and I was told this couldn't be done, but I'm working on it, and it can be done. So my past is dyed rather than painted. So I'm dyeing with different colours, and it's batik work, so it's protecting it with wax. But because it's a coarse fabric, I'm having to work quite hard on how I play with the materials. So I prepare my own canvases anyway. And I've been working with the mills and working with the dyes and working about the waxes and the temperatures. I wouldn't say I'm fully there, but I'm getting there. And this new piece of work, you see the history of the dot workers and people coming into Petticoat Lane or coming off the Tower Bridge, almost as though it's a whisper. And imposing on that, I've posed oil painting. So you see through that picture a past. I'm hoping that people will look at it in a cultural sense, and then it'll open their eyes to a wider sense. Well, I think one of the things that we are a history of persecution. We've got it over and over again, as you've said. And one of the things I think that makes us survive is our community. Now, you can go into any shul, any synagogue, whether it's religious or not, and people will welcome you in. And you see, I think what people don't understand in the Christian world, that it's not just going to a synagogue or going to a church and going to a service. It's a way of life. Even if you look at the religious side, to make a prayer, men have to have a minyan, they have to have 10 people. Now, we're suffering a lot now from mental health. And if you look at what we're doing in the Jewish community, we're reaching out all the time. The rabbis are giving talks, the rebbitzins are giving talks. There's social groups for the kids. There's lots of support system. You're not alone. And I think that is how I mean, one of the difficult issues I think we have as Jews is we can be too enclosed. Because of the fear outside, I think we feel frightened and we don't necessarily want to mix in the outside world. It's secure to be amongst our group. I think that's dangerous because if you don't mix, people stereotype us and they don't know us and they get the power. And I think, for me personally, I think as a Jew, my role is to be out there and mix and know people. I never hide who I am. I will engage in a dialogue. I don't get excitable when I'm in a dialogue. I understand where people are coming from because I've worked with so many different communities. But I think it's important that people know I'm a Jew and that I'm not evil and that I'm not bad and that we are all part of society and we want to contribute to society. And that is a message that to me is important. And I say to people, whatever group you are, whatever ethnicity you are, you must have courage to be yourself. Provided it doesn't cause damage to other communities, have courage to be who you are and hold on to your identity and be proud of your history. So from my work, try and learn something in other groups. So it's not insulated. That's how I look at it. I would say I was talent spotted about 10 years ago. So I've been working, beavering away on my own, just getting on with it. Art's been my voice. I don't know if there was a lot of interest, but there was a girl that was doing a Chagall exhibition, a curator in Liverpool, and was marrying a non-Jewish boy and wanted to know whether there was any artist dealing with identity, dealing with historical identity. And she got into my website and came and saw me on the pretense that she wanted to buy some prints, but it wasn't that. She wanted to see the original work. And then she said to me, why isn't this work known? I said, well, it's so difficult to get known. You send your work out into exhibitions or you're only known in a niche market. And people think, they can take a photograph of a synagogue or it's trying to draw people's attention to your story is not easy. And she said, I'm going to do something for you. I'm going to get you launched. It won't be the right gallery, but I'm going to get you launched into London with the main gallery. And they did launch me, and it was a success. What was interesting then, I got out into the social media world. And then Israel was looking for a British artist to tell the story of Balfour on the creation of Israel. And of course, I call myself a visual storyteller. I tell stories. And this really appealed to me. So I contacted them and they said, well, we don't know you. We don't know your work. You're not known. You're not with a curator. You'll have to do a presentation. Come to Israel, do a presentation, and let's see what your work's about. So I took some work out, did a presentation, and they thought my work was up to standard. And then they said, come back with your ideas. How are you going to tell the story of the Balfour on the creation of Israel? And I did my sketch work. I went out to Israel, and at the panel meeting, they said, well, you've got that commission. And that was the journey with Israel. And that's where the link is with Jerusalem Benali. And when that session was, I got a lot of coverage. The work was hung in the Knesset. It was viewed by Simon Sharma, and exploded with interest. And they said they're not going to let me go. And then they introduced me to someone who has been my art advisor, not like an agent, but guided me creatively and has connections, was Vera Pilpul. And she's been amazing. I mean, she's really brought my work up. I've also been doing some work with a historian called Pam Fox, Dr. Pam Fox. And she's won awards for her research on Jewish social history. And this is my third project now I've completed with her on illustrating her cover and the work in the book. So the first one was about Golders Green, because she moved to Golders Green and she's not Jewish, she's converted. So for her coming into Golders Green, which is a very Jewish area, was a big step. What's going on here on a Saturday? People are wandering around. I mean, it's a different world out there to many other communities. And she went into the research about how this community, how did the Jewish community build up in God's Green, and I did the cover for that and the illustrations of in the book. And then she did a book on Jews by the seaside. Now, if you look in Amazon and you look at Dr. Pam Fox, you'll see her books. And again, I did the story because in 1950 was the peak years. So the Jewish community didn't go to Israel. A lot of them went to Bournemouth. That became the social community. And she did a big research. So she went into about the hotels, she goes into about the waiters, she goes about the people who did the entertainment. She goes, she does a lot about the food, the whole atmosphere of this place and what attracted them. So again, I did the cover and the illustrations. Now we've got a new book coming out in February. It's called Nostalgia. Nostalgia, playing on the word, because it's on Bloom's The Restaurant and how that started in the East End and how she's understood the history is through characterization. And again, I've done the artwork and the cover of this man from Bloom's who came from Lithuania, who came into Petticoat, came to Brick Lane, and then opened up by Whitechapel, how he attracted all the people, where he moved on to Golders Green, and then it faded out. But through her research, it tells you a lot about the Jewish history, about changing in food, changing in lifestyle, why people were attracted to a particular area, why people worked with Jewish people, what was that attraction. So it has different avenues. That's sort of work I've been doing. No, that's not quite correct. What happened was, it was meant to be shown in Jerusalem in November. But because of the war, they decided to do something different. So I'm with the Italian group, because I had a showing in Italy and my reviews were so good, they said I could join the Jerusalem Biennale group, which was the Italian artists. So they decided the various countries that couldn't get to Israel for the Jerusalem Biennale would show in those countries. So I have actually had that exhibition in Turin, in Calle Monferrato, and that exhibition will hopefully be going to Israel in Jerusalem in March, depending again if we've got peace. But in the meantime, we are looking for exhibitions to take place in London this year, in 2024. There are two projects. One is to have an exhibition of my work in London, and one is to have an exhibition of my work in Romania. So those are two, besides going in for open calls and competitions. I think my palette is often influenced by the mood or the messages I want to get through. My early work's very colourful. It depends what media I'm using as well. So as being a printmaker, besides being a painter, so in my etching world, it's much more tonal and texture. When I did the work on Beyond the Ashes, occasionally I might put a hint of colour in, but to me, it wasn't something that I wanted to be celebrating. I'm showing the spirit moving on, but I'm also showing the destruction. So there's a negativity, but there is also a positivity. And I didn't want the impact of that negativity to be lost. Not to blame, but it happened. And I didn't want it to be lost, but I wanted to show its journey. So that story involved a very different technique. It was done as a printmaker, dealing with textures of the stone, the texture of the walls, and also the figures are much more almost hinting at figures. They're not solid figures. So they have that feeling that they're moving on, they're flying away, the spirit's moving on. So it's a different objective. And depending on my mood and the mood that I wanted to create in the picture, I would choose my colours and my work. So when I was doing the Bloom's picture, which is a work that's done on wood, and the past is etched with wire, so I've burnt the image in the past, and the present the present bit of history, because Bloom's doesn't exist, but the present history that I'm showing is vibrant. It's a place of fun. People used to go out for meals to meet their friends and chat with people, and the food used to drip all over the place, and the waiters were more in control than the customers. And you know, and there was the thing about the car park where the cars kept bashing each other. It was a fun place, and that's a story I need to tell. It depends where my story is and what my palette is and what my mood is. With the story on Clifford Tower, that will be one I will have a somber tone, even though I will impose a modern life on it. There will be a somber tone on it because I feel it's a story that is still there, still floating in the air. We haven't got rid of it. So it depends what my objectives are. And I don't think about my style. So I have an idea and I get on and I draw it. And when I start my work, I know exactly where I'm finishing. So some people paint and they evolve as they go along. I don't evolve a lot. I do change and subtly, but like a writer, I plan very heavily. As you say, I'm very detailed. I know exactly what I want to put in, what my message is, how am I going to make this work. And I work the tapestry to tell the story. And it depends what I want to tell.
It is Hanukkah. What does this Hanukkah mean to you?
Now that's a really interesting one because we've been to quite a lot of talks from my synagogue on Hanukkah and also about the light and the issues of the Maccabees at the time. And why do we focus on the light and not the war? So we won the war with the Maccabees, but we're focusing on the miracle of the light. And from what I understand, which is quite an interesting interpretation, is that the light represents us as our customs, our way of life. So wars will come and go, and it's like your question about how is it we survived. But the light is our fundamental way of living and connecting and being Jewish. So for me, Hanukkah is about we're still here, we're still optimistic, we still have a light in the community. And I think we still have to contribute to the community. I've been always as a family, we've always been keen on supporting non-Jewish charities besides Jewish charities. It's about reaching out. We do have a feeling of benevolence and a feel of social responsibility. It's not just about us. So that's what I see with Hanukkah. The light still shines. Well, I'll talk to you about them as far as the creative work's concerned. And we're aiming for group exhibitions. I'd like to connect with other artists a bit more, so more group exhibitions in London, but there will be solo exhibitions in Romania. So we're looking at Bucharest and we're looking at Oradea. And I'm quite keen if it's in Oradea that we get one into Hungary and Budapest because it's so much on the borders there. So I did 3 years. I went there and back to Romania on that project. So I know it quite well. So there's Romania and London, and then there'll be open call exhibitions trying to get my work out into competition work. So I got some work out last year at the Bankside Gallery, and that was work on shadows of Baghdad in Iraq. Where you see the history is in sepia and fading, and then what's today is almost rubble. People's identity has been destroyed. And there's one person praying amongst the rubble, but you have to look close to see that he's praying. It's just a person lost amongst the rubble. So that got hung in an international exhibition at Bankside Gallery. And a lot of people were interested in that subject. So it's quite important sometimes to get your work out in a more of a communal based thing. But it's very difficult because you get 100 pictures chosen and thousands are entered. And I sometimes think, are people actually looking? But that did get in, and people did pick that up, and that did get reviews. I do open call exhibitions. I think it's hard because you don't always get in. But it's also important to hope that you do.
Is there a verse or a paragraph that keeps coming?
Interesting, that one. It's another question I've really thought about a lot. I suppose some of the Psalms in the prayer books, sometimes when I feel very low, I'll read a Psalm. And I think, especially the Psalms of David, when he is on his own, he feels everything's, he's in the cave and he's on his own. And he wants spiritual strength to continue. I sometimes feel as an artist, and I think all artists do it. Obviously, you feel you're on your own. I mean, I've created something on my own. I haven't gone as a group. I haven't followed the herd. I've created my own group, my own thoughts, and expanded them. And sometimes I feel that the mountain is sometimes, will I ever reach the top of the mountain? Will I ever get to where I want to be? Will I get my messages? Will I get people to open their minds to see what I'm saying? I sometimes feel that's why I'm doing more cultural identity for some of the work. The moment it has a religious connection, we'll block it. I'm not saying that people got to be Jewish. I'm not preaching a religion. I'm just saying this is a group of people in community that exist. That's it. And this is how we exist. Our history and our culture as well makes us who we are. And don't knock it. And there are many other groups that also need to open their mind up to who they are. I know people have criticized Black Lives Matter because they think it's perhaps an anti-Semitic group. I don't know if it is or it's not, and I'm not going to question that. But what I do think is they open people's eyes to think, there's a culture here that matters. People matters as people. And that's my message. It's not necessarily just as a Jew, but as a Jew, I have sympathy and empathy that people matter and understand. When I've been working in the East End and I go into the market and there's people all dressed up in lots of colourful clothes and in saris and in burqas and all sorts of clothes, and the men in sort of little white hats and trousers, very different clothing, and you speak to them and they speak perfect English. There's not an accent in them. They're educated. They talk to you as they don't talk down to you. They talk to you as a normal human being. And you know what? We have a colourful history in Britain. We have different cultures, and we should not only respect, we should appreciate the different cultures. And it gives life colour and interest. You look at our music, you look at our food, you look at our fashion. It's not one-channeled. It intermixes. And I want people to see that. I think you might be interested to see the new work with the new technique that's coming up, because that's really different. No one's tackled this method of painting before. You paint with a brush, and I'm painting by dye. And I've done that in order to give a complete contrast to the painting of today or the story of today. And I think you'd find that interesting. We didn't touch on my feminism work, so I can mention a bit on that, which is about when people conceal their identity. My person advice directs me, Vera, is very into feminism. And she said to me, what do you find difficult in being a woman and a Jew? Where is there areas that you find very difficult? So it's now looking at something that's negative rather than positive. And that's quite challenging. And I find it very difficult if I go into an Orthodox community and a veil or a curtain is put in front of my face. Now, the reason being, for me, I'm not worried whether men and women take the service. It doesn't really worry me particularly. I just enjoy the service. I enjoy people enjoying the service. I enjoy connecting to that service. So I haven't got very strong theological opinions. But I do get upset if my vision is blurred. Because as an artist, that's my strength. It's what I see and what I observe and what I feel. And people have said to me, oh, well, you don't have to go to that sort of service. No, it's a choice. So it's not always a choice. It's not always a choice. For example, my daughters are more religious than me. And at my grandson's bar mitzvah, I was behind a curtain. That was not my choice. So I did some work, and I've been doing work about women behind the veil. And that's what's been shown in the Jerusalem Benalia, when women cannot reveal themselves publicly in a religious space. And then I've contrasted it with Muslim women who cannot reveal themselves in a public space. Now, the question is it choice? If you choose to be like that, but do you really choose to be like that? Are you indoctrinated? Are you intimidated? Is it a choice? I'm not always so sure. Are you caught up that you want to be accepted and therefore you conform? At my grandson's bar mitzvah, my daughter at the very last minute pulled the curtain. Very last minute she pulled the curtain, and she knew that they couldn't do anything about it because her son had started the bar mitzvah and it would be in a complete disruption. So she had the strength of character to do that, which I respect. She said, why can't I see my son? She said, why can't I see my son? So there is areas that, as a woman, I do question. And we have started on this series, Behind the Veil, and also linked it up with the story of Purim, where Esther had to not only disguise her identity in order to save the Jews, but when we celebrate Purim, and it's Esther that saved the day, but Esther's not part of that service. If she wants to be part of the service, it's all women. It's not men respecting her, yet it was her that saved the day. So there's a more controversial bit, and that's about identity as a woman, which is a bit different. I haven't thought about.
How do you find that Jewish women cope with the events that happened, throughout this war?
I think it's a universal feeling in the sense everyone's disgusted, everyone's hurt. What I understand from Vera, who's a person who's interested very much in this feminism, because the women were raped in that massacre, there's been an outcry about how, protecting women and identity, and it's such a medieval practice that something to be like that. It's difficult. I entered some work which sold very quickly for Women's Aid, which is about women in abusive relationships in domestic violence, basically. And I entered a piece of work. I thought actually it was going to be in a trendy place in the East End, but actually it was right in the heart of the Jewish world. And I entered this book about a woman in a burqa who's in the Middle East and everything around her is falling apart, but she's climbing the steps with a child. And I thought the subject matter was very relevant, but I didn't realise it was it was mainly an Orthodox group. I thought it was going to be in Hoxted in the East End. I got it wrong. But surprisingly, that picture sold really quickly. It's one of the first pieces they sold in the first hour, and people wanting that picture. And it was only a small sketch. It's interesting because Orthodox women are very dressed up. They're very covered up. And is that fear that they might be raped? Do they need to cover themselves up because of that fear? That they can't be relaxed and feel free? And that goes back into history, doesn't it? It's an interesting thought. And from the war, I think, obviously everybody's upset, whether you're a man or a woman. Humanity is upset. And I think what's upset women, not people generally, is the protest marches isn't about hating Hamas. Nobody wants all these deaths. Nobody wants all this destruction. But they don't seem to be blaming Hamas for it. They seem to be blaming the Israelis for it because they're trying to defend themselves. And I had an issue on the first day of Simchas Torah as I was going to synagogue. My neighbor is a Muslim, and she's covered up, and she approached me as I was going to shul. And she said to me, "What do you think about what's happened in Israel? What's happened in the Middle East?" And I'd only just heard about it. And my immediate reaction to her was, "I feel sorry for the Palestinians." I said, living in a dictatorship like that, and instead of money going into their homes and into their education and into food and into hospitals, it's going into warfare and building tunnels. What life have those people got? And now it's going to be terrible with the bombing and the destruction, and the bitterness will take years to get over. What's happened now in Gaza, the resentment of people because they've lost their families, they won't blame Hamas, they'll blame the Israelis because they did the bombing. So it's a very sad situation. Any loss of life is sad and disrespectful. I hope that after this war that we can help to build Gaza and the Palestinians have a happy, normal life and be proud of who they are. But live in peace. It might be too optimistic.
Your art does convey a message of peace. You are showing events that are taking place in peace, prayers, various celebrations. And I'm assuming that you will continue this series of showing Jewish life in peace.
I hope so. I mean, that's my mission. Sometimes I try to make it a bit more subtle. That's why I'm trying to move on to some work being a bit more subtle. Because I think you have to think about how you can open that door. So the wider community, the Jewish community on the whole, know about their history. We're not the ones that need to know, need to connect. It's connecting to the outside world. So I think I'm quite keen now on some pieces being much more subtle in its message. And then perhaps they'll get into my website or they'll get into know me and they'll widen that view. But I think one has to think of the psychology of how to achieve your goal. And it's always not just, this is what I want to do and I'm going to do it, and no matter what everybody says, I'm getting on and doing it. There is that level, but there's also the subtle level. You know, it's like in politics and that. You want to achieve your objective, you've got to work within the system. And how you're going to work that system.
Hashem Hamlucha Moshe Ba'agoyim
V'choyso la'Hashem Hamlucha
Oyo Hashem Melech
Al kol ha'aretz